you please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Cheryl, we have a roll call, please.
Mr. Moats?
Here.
Mrs. Davis?
Here.
Mrs. Overland?
Here.
Mr. Wall?
Here.
Mr. Rodenberger?
Here.
And Superintendent Morton?
Here.
Moving on down to presentations in public, we're gonna forego that because of the pandemic, and hopefully maybe next month we can start.
I would say that
having the public into our meetings.
we did take that off the agenda. We will invite public to return to our June meeting. I told you the second meeting in May, without looking at the calendar, we do not have one. So we will open back up in June, if you're all okay with that.
Great.
Be happy to do that.
If we did get a large crowd, we would ask people to stage into the auditorium, and we have the ability to broadcast it in the auditorium if they wanted to watch and then still come in, okay?
How many people have it?
I'd have to look at the capacity, Michael, and it's probably different than what I think it is, because it's designated as a classroom, but how we reconfigure it, we might have to move some of the comfortable chairs out, so Tim will have to sit on like a hardwood stool or something. But other than that, I think we'd be okay to have probably 15 or so people in.
Moving on down to the 5-year forecast at 2.1. Kathy, are we? Cheryl, you're in the wrong seat.
Thank you.
Motion to accept.
You all have a presentation in front of you. So in case you can't see what's up on the board, you can look at your notes. So.
Perfect.
So looking at the May forecast, what I did was decided to take a different approach this time and just go over the changes from November to the May forecast. I think all of you understand the basis of the forecast, where our money comes from, where it's expended. So I really want to review the changes. Instead, it's an emphasis on them because there's been a lot of them since the November forecast. So going by line item, the first one is property tax. We got our final numbers from the auditor for the update, and originally in November it was forecast at 4.1%, because I could not bring myself to believe that it was going to increase 10.2, and it did. So we saw an increase in residential of 10.2 and a decrease in agricultural of 3.9, which was expected. Overall, that was a 9.6% increase to that line item, resulting in increased collections of $846,017 over the course of the 5 years. Tangible personal property, same thing. It's tied to the property tax collection and the valuation. Unfortunately, though, I talked to the county auditor regarding our last payment in March was $233 below what it should have been. So I spoke to the county auditor through email and asked her if she had an idea of what that was, if it was a collection or delinquency. She honestly thought it was due to the mail being backed up and not receiving those payments on time. So what I did was I put that money being recouped in the next tax payment, which is in the next fiscal year, which is why you'll see on the forecast that line item jump up so much. And then the future years go back to what would be collected with the valuation changes that are forecast for property tax. Increased collections for that line item over all 4 years is $418,117. And again, that has to be increased valuation, not the change in collection of payments. So, next one is income tax. As stated in the November forecast, We did have decreased collections at that time. First quarter was down 14.7%. Second quarter was down 5.7. Third, we're up. There was a little bit of hope from 1.6, and then went back down in fourth quarter of 3.5. So every year it's forecast that there's an increase of 23,254 to income tax, based on the historical trending of that collection rate. But over the cumulative change over the 5-year forecast for all 5 years is a decrease in collections of 25,432, just based on these decreased numbers forecasting and trending forward, trying to recoup that loss. So you're not seeing the full value of what's being increased, but collections are forecast to go back to normal in fiscal year 23. Unrestricted aid, there's been a significant amount of changes in unrestricted aid. If you remember back in November, we were told in May of 2020 that our funding was going to be reduced by $359,293 in 2020, which it was. It then was decreased that same amount in fiscal year 21, but since then they have given back some of that decrease, so we only saw a decrease of $162,242. So doing that improved that line item by that amount of money going forward. Other things that have impacted that is that, let me see the thing. The preschool numbers were in November were projected to decrease because our preschool numbers were down. We did not realize that because our preschool numbers are the same as what they were. We're a little bit down, but we haven't realized the decrease in funding. Thank you. And then future reductions moving forward from 22 to 25 just have to do based on the trending analysis. There's currently a planning and budget and legislation process. We've been giving some indication of what that'll have, what that will contain, but until it's finalized, those numbers won't be included here. One of the major concerns I have about the new biennium budget is the fact that they're talking about moving student wellness and student success money, of which we get $800 and some thousand. This year, forecast $1 million next year, outside the general fund, offsetting general fund expenditures. So if that money gets rolled into the foundation payment or into our state aid, it'll most likely be half the percentage our state aid is. So say if we're getting $1.6 million this year, and next year they say we're going to keep you at that funding level, but roll your student wellness and student success in, we're going to get $1.6 million.
Yeah.
I will have forecast $1 million worth of expenses being removed from the general fund to student wellness and student success. I don't think that's going to happen in its entirety because this is the governor's actual program. He's very strong in keeping that program alive, and I don't think that he would let that program die being rolled in there. So until we see those numbers, I don't know what those changes are. So the changes over the forecast for this equated over the 5 years to $1.4 million. Property tax allocation, this is the reimbursement that we get for homestead rollback from the state. Very insignificant changes there. That's also tied to tax collection valuation. So we actually did see a small decrease in November, from November, and that has to do with the decreased collections. And then forecasting forward is an increase of 155,626 because of the 10.2% increase. All of the revenue. This one's a little bit difficult to forecast right now because interest rates are changing significantly from what we forecast originally, and we're also not receiving rental income that we normally receive for renting of our athletic fields. So the overall to this is a decrease of $26,590, but you can see forecasting forward, the decreased rentals is $9,000, and interest this year we are scheduled to receive $265,000 less than we received in previous years. So that's a huge impact to this line item, but fortunately we've been able to negotiate some payments for like taxes in lieu, which are posted here. So those offset that decrease, at least for the first couple of years. So the accumulated 5-year change for that is over $1 million. Other sources decreased $28,000 in fiscal year 21. There was the one-time receipt for the bond refunding that was done, in fiscal year 21 of $230,000 and change. It was subtracted out for future years. We've also received increased DWC reimbursements or rebates by $192,692 that weren't forecasted in the other forecast. So even though there are some changes that were taken out in the future, you can see that there were some things that were put into replace that. So the overall change for all 5 years of that collection is $732,285. And that changes because eventually I put the rental back in, eventually I put the interest back in, so that's how it accumulates over the time. And just so you know too, if you look at the forecast and the notes, you get a full history of where the numbers went, where they're going to. This is just a change from one to the next. Next thing is operating transfers in. This is actually on the agenda this evening. To pass a resolution to pay off the general fund debt of $1,050,000, to pay off early to save $39,000 in interest. This will be paid for in fiscal year 22, and it eliminates the debt payments from fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 25 that were scheduled to be November 1st. Overall, the 5-year impact for all 5 years from November to May is an increased collections of $1,071,076. Is there any question on the revenue? Expenses. There's a lot been going on with expenses in relation to staffing and grants. If you recall, which I'm sure all of you do, I know Bob and I do, that there was a RIF situation that happened based on numbers from a previous May forecast and the cuts that were made to our state foundation funding. That, in addition to the staff that we were able to move out to ESSER and student wellness and student success funds, we were able to decrease that line item from the November forecast by $544,451 in fiscal year 21. We see additional savings of $220,000 in fiscal year 22, but this is a little bit offset in future funding because of raises and re-implementing some of the staff back into the forecast. So all the stuff that's taken out for student wellness and student success and ESSER funds will be put back in the forecast in fiscal year 24. If there's any changes in student wellness and success or with ESSER, that will happen sooner, which then we'll have to take a look at the forecast and see where we are financially. Classified staff changes, same thing. We reallocated some money to grants for positions that were going to be RIF'd that weren't RIF'd because of having the grant money. So that was offset in fiscal year 21. The actual savings was $103,000, but when you add in raises and steps, it resulted in $45,000. Of that amount, $48,751 is returned to general fund. That amount is lower than the original amount because some of the positions that we reduced are not coming back with the full-time staff. Administrative staff changes and reallocation of grants resulted in a savings of $195,000 in fiscal year 21 and an additional $34,000 in fiscal year 22. It was offset by raises resulting in a net savings of $159,961 in 21 and $3,800 in 22. Of this amount, $225,250 is returned to general fund in 24 and 25. The increase in fiscal year 24 includes a new position, a new administrative position, but it's combining two administration positions. So we're going from 2 admins down to 1. But this new position will be taken from the grant up until that fiscal year 24, so we won't actually have that back in the general fund until then. So overall, combined with forced past steps and raises, the financial impact in fiscal year 24 is a $262,371% increase, or $379 increase. Net result of this decrease in expenses from November to May is $281,961 for fiscal year 21. And the accumulated 5-year is $1,452,440. Any questions on that? kind of go hand in hand with salaries. So you can see November 22, the forecast had an increase in this line item of 1.4, and May 22, the forecast is 1.03. So there's a small amount of change there. And for the first year of the ESSER grant, the benefits weren't taken out of the general, or weren't taken out of the grant. They were taken out of general funds, so we have enough money to do that. In future years, benefits will be taken out of the general, or out of the grant, not the general fund. So starting next year, we'll have enough money to take out the benefits as well. So that's why you don't see the significant increase. So you can see like the losing the grant was what they all of it will return this year 24. This year we implemented a dual platform for insurance. And the district realized savings of about $67,000 this year for making that switch. We're currently in negotiations. We're hoping to move toward making some other progress on insurance benefits to help offset future increases. The accumulated change for all 5 years with what's in the forecast now is about $600,000 over 5 years. Purchase services. This one is where we have all the contracts for special education, contracts for maintenance, so on and so forth. So in fiscal year 21, the line item decreased by $185,000 by moving expenses of preschool to ESSER and student wellness and success funds. We were only able to move out a portion of the preschool costs for a class that was full-time, not the part-time classes, because those were established in the previous year, so the full-day class was new from the previous year. In 22 and 23, we removed the initial $279,000 for paying for the whole preschool. So moving from student wellness and success money in 21, we're able to move the preschool to ESSER funds in 22, but we're out of ESSER funds, we're able to pay for the whole program. So that's a huge difference between 21, where we could only pay for any new programs, which was the additional full-day class from a half-day class, and moving to ESSER funds paying the full amount. So there's a significant savings there.
And that's because of the term called maintenance of effort, correct, in the
Correct.
ESSER grant?
Well, the maintenance of effort is actually in the general fund, so we have to be careful that we don't remove too many expenses from the general fund into grants, because then we won't meet maintenance of effort in the general fund. Basically, maintenance of effort just says you have to spend a certain percentage over what you spent in the previous year, or a certain percentage of what you spent in the previous year.
I should have said continuity of operations.
Thank you.
All right.
This has the largest cumulative change of over $2 million. And then I wanted to point out too that with joining the Ohio School Council for electricity, our electricity costs are decreased over $100,000 this year. So that was a good move, Mr. Gordon.
Thank you. It was wise for a $600 expenditure to join the council.
Moving on to supplies, the change in the forecast from November to now is a decrease of $38,612. This is allocated for COVID supplies that were moved out of the general fund and into grants. Fiscal year 2022, we've added back the expensive textbooks, which were eliminated in 21 and part of 20, because we were able to add that in because of the expenses that we're moving out. We're able to afford that back in the general fund. Plus, we're trying to get back on a rotation schedule so that we're not buying one year, not buying the next, buying one, and going sporadic. So textbooks have been added back in 22 or 284,000, and every year after that, they've been added in at 300,000 per year. We hope to approve the rotation schedule that was put on hold in fiscal year 2021. There's fiscal year 21 also, there was a 10% budget cut for instructional supplies that was restored in future years, creating an overall change in 5 years of an increase of $132,976.
Sure, so we're projecting all these assumptions are made while currently using ESSER funds for some of these different items.
ESSER funds and student wellness and success.
Student wellness and success. And those are due to run out when?
Well, there's 3 rounds of ESSER. The first one we experienced in fiscal year 21. Second is going to be 22, and then today actually we just came out with what they call the American Recovery Plan,
Yes.
essentially. So these funds can be used all the way through fiscal year 2024.
Okay, so they cover the entire.
Yes, that's why all the expenses, if you look at the forecast and you look at 2024, especially like the personnel services and the fringes, you'll see a huge increase of like 10 to 15% because all of those amounts are coming back.
And we're able to carry over student wellness and success funds fiscal year to fiscal year, correct?
Right, and the one good thing, I mean, I know I say it's a bad thing if it rolls into the foundation formula, but if it did and we can still get the increase of those dollars, the one good thing about it is it becomes unrestricted aid.
Correct.
Which means that right now there are very few categories that we can spend student wellness and success in. Like for example, has to be like nursing services or
Mental health,
services, so on and so forth.
safety,
Yeah.
there are like 7 things you can spend it on.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, once you get used to something, you don't hate to see it go away. And, so when we project forward, are we projecting in anticipation of keeping all these types of things? Or are we going to
Well, I think that
automatically cut them and just say?
No, we're not gonna automatically cut them. We'll evaluate annually, and it's not something we're gonna wait and see what it's like at the end. That's something that we'll evaluate
Each year.
between Cheryl and I. We've sat down and looked and say, what are long-term visions that we need to keep in place, regardless if there's federal dollars coming in or state dollars coming in, and what do we wanna keep? And, you know, a big expenditure is the preschool expenditure. That saves us close to $1 million annually by being able to pay for that out of that. So when moving forward, how do we recoup that expense? And that's why we bring people on board to help us, you know, restructure that and potentially take that over. And that's how we would maintain that program, but reduce our expenses from it. So that's what we're gonna be doing over the next, probably starting this summer, is looking at how we can do things like that, so that we're not taking money out of our general fund to sustain programs that we're bringing on with grant money.
And a lot of the grant positions that are being paid out of the grant were existing employees at the time, and some of them, like, for example, in my office, that position went to part-time, it will not go back to full-time when, in 2024, it will remain part-time.
If you recall, we had phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 cuts because we didn't have to go to phase 2, but they were considered, we were able to pay for those people out of the grant. And then we had phase 3, which is the same thing, and we can use that to offset because they were potentially gonna be reduced because of the, you know, the cut in funding and the potential cut in income tax revenue, so.
And what I've been trying to do is find expenses in 2024 and pay them now,
Yes.
when we have the money. So like, for example, the debt, that's why,
Yes.
you know, the recommendation was to pay off the debt ahead of time, so that in 2024, we're not having a $300,000 debt payment when we're adding back in those expenses. So there
Yeah.
are expenses that we have removed from 2024 as much as possible. Another one being the rotation of high school Chromebooks, paid
Yes.
out of the grant. Teacher laptops, paid out of the grant. So those rotation schedules will be put off so that we won't have those expenses coming back in those years. I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure that the public understands, you know, I think this 5-year forecast is going to look like we're swimming somewhat in dough, not swimming in dough, but we have money.
It will appear that way, that is correct.
And
But you go to 24 and then say, that's real.
that's not
That-
the
yeah.
case, so it's kind of like.
That takes all the grant money away from it, and that puts it into real perspective, that is correct.
In one of the technology we need to in one of the slides,
Yeah,
here,
that's
under
the
the
one.
cash balance, I mean, we're okay with the,
When you touch, remember Cheryl, I told you not to touch.
we're okay until it comes 2024, yeah.
Just touch the bottom there, Sherry, real easy. No, up on the screen. There you go. Go back to where she was.
They'll go back. Yeah, so we're trying to show people that yes, the next 3 years, we are getting a lot of grant funding from the federal government and from the state government. we're trying to be financially prudent with that money and spend it either on one-time expenses, which will offset that complete expense from the general fund, and give us the money to carry forward to offset the increases in 2024, or paying debt that would be still occurring in 2024. Like if you read through the notes, you'll see that when the preschool program comes back, I'm estimating back at $400,000. It doesn't take a mathematician to say that if you have a decrease of 185 and 279, plus I talked about an additional 200,000 in the first year, that doesn't equal 400,000. That means that I'm assuming that there are going to be some reductions to that program or a different strategy in place for the program.
Now, when you do make these assumptions, do you take into account what's happening in other areas, for example, suppliers, and anticipating, for example, we have a pipeline thing going on right now, anticipating costs that they're going to incur, that they're going to pass on to us?
I mean, we have an inflationary rate in every line item of the budget. When the software that I use, you can drill down by object. So say, for example, garbage removal is a line item. I go in, I look at the trend, I look at the area, because like Arizona is a lot different than us because they're getting different amounts of money. There's districts that are getting pipeline money that are in a lot better situations because that money is ongoing. It's not just one-time grant money. But we do try to pay attention to the area and the increases in the area as much as we can. And talking with other treasurers and talking with other colleagues to see what they're experiencing. So I mean, all of that's kind of taken together and put into this forecast.
Yeah, there's not a, oh, we're gonna put 7% interest or inflation on everything and apply it. It's line by line, correct?
Yeah, there's
or
a lot
item
of,
by item.
Right, and there's a lot of analytics that go behind these numbers that talk about like inflationary rates and tax collection rates and student enrollment and so on and so forth that help build these particular numbers. So it's not just a straight 3%. Oh, we had 3% last year, so we need 3% this year.
I think with the current financial state of the nation, when you take a look at all the industries and small businesses that are receiving these types of funds from the federal government, and those are eventually going to be taken away, they're going to have to recoup those funds in some way, and we're going to end up having to pay a price. So the normal anticipation or 1% or 3%, I don't think is going to hold true for the next 5 years or so.
It's probably gonna
It's
be.
gonna go. And I can tell you that a lot of the percentages where there were like 3% or 2%, those were raised to 4 and 6%.
Thank you. Now I got to throw them off.
Capital outlay, as you guys recall, Mr. Moore applied for some grants for bus cameras and entryway upgrades. So that allocation was removed from capital outlay, resulting in a decrease of $84,964 and a cumulative over the 5 years of $139,118. So overall, looking at all of the expense items, we're looking at a decrease in spending of $2.9 million over the course of the 5 years, which is equal to the last year funding for ESSER. So, I don't want people to think that we're, decreasing funding by eliminating whatever. We're eliminating expenses out of the general fund to pay for by grants. Only because I don't want to be in a situation where we decide, hey, let's add a new wing on to the high school, and then I have this additional expense and these additional staff and these things that are going to impact. Because the grant money is not a sustainable grant. You have to come with one-time expenses, and you have to offset future expenditures in order for you not to fall flat on your face in fiscal year 2024. Any questions? More questions on?
You're there. If you tap, you're already moving it.
Okay,
Just,
so
there you go.
cumulative change. If you add in the additional revenue and the additional decrease, the decrease in expenditures, it's a $3.9 million change from November to now. Like I said, it was significantly different than what we were looking at in November. As a part of the budget, it was 2.46%, and the other one for levy reservations was $6,076, and that just has to do with the fact that we have an emergency levy that has to go on the ballot for renewal next year for collection in 2023. I wanted to put this in here just to remind people, and like kind of what you were saying, Gary, is that this yellow is our state funding. This blue and this orange is salary and benefits. So if the yellow goes away or reduces, what's gonna happen to this? You're gonna have to reduce to this line. And that's the point. It's like, we are a service industry, and if we lose money or expenses go up to where we can't maintain them, we have to eliminate that. We're trying to not get back in that situation. You can see here that it's not, I mean, we do deficit spend every year the forecast except for fiscal year 21 with the projected assumptions in place. You can see here where the expenditures start to really outpace revenues. And again, the chart where it shows we have a pretty healthy cash balance up to fiscal year 23, 24, and then it goes down. Part of that decrease is because of levy money taken out of the forecast and put down below. The majority of that is adding those expenses back in, and not sustaining the cash carrier, which is supported. So Bob and I have our work cut out for us, and Sherry, to make sure that that doesn't happen. I mean, you've heard me say it before, the forecast is good for about 2, maybe 3 years, depending on where you're on the biennial budget cycle. So, you know, we're gonna work during those 3 years to make sure that the following 3 years don't look like that. So, I think that is it. You do have about 20 additional pages attached to this that talk about just visuals of what I present. So like this here is a compare analysis. So it says, okay, from November to May, these are the changes every year in those line items. If they're positive, it went up. If they're negative, they went down. Same for expenses. And you can see in expenses, all of them are going down significantly. This is the graph that we're used to that shows that we are in the positive all 5 years, ending at about 578,000 or 84,000 the 50 year. So again, expenditure per pupil based on change in enrollment. So take a look at these slides. I think that they probably have a better picture of what I can say up here. You know, especially like looking like evaluation, you can see really where we're going. You can see the huge jump when we have updates. So just take a look at these and have them for reference. There are a lot of really good visuals, especially if you ask questions about, you know, where does our revenue come from? Like, I know all of you out there having this conversation with your friends. Where do our expenses go? It gives you a lot of information. And then some of the final ones talk about like benefits, salaries and benefits, and what makes up those numbers. Because you have retirement benefits, and then you also have health care. And of course, our major contributor to the health care is medical. That we're paying right now. So those are some great slides to look at. The very, very end of the slides are non-general. So this is ESSER 2. This is fiscal year 2022. This is how much money we have set aside to spend in these categories. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we're taking from the general fund and putting into ESSER. And how much the difference between the allocation for ESSER and the general fund amount is one-time expenditures. That's just fiscal year 22. Like I said, they just came out with fiscal year 23 additional funding. So student wellness, student success. I know this visual of the expenses equal, so it's not really real analytical, but it tells you how much we get a year. And I wanted you to be able to have this so you can look and say, okay, we're getting 136,000 in 21. That's $1 million in 22 and 1.3 million in 23. And then the cafeteria, because everybody keeps asking, how is our athletics doing? How is our cafeteria doing? Right now, it does not look like we will have to subsidize our cafeteria, but I will tell you that we may need to have a discussion about athletics, about subsidizing them, just because of the fact that the revenue was so decreased by
I think one of the key things when you look at the ESSER expenditures and how we're looking at it, you can see almost $1.4 million of that money is put into the category of instruction. And that is, if we're gonna get better at school per se, and we're gonna try and achieve our goals, that is where that allocation has gotta go. It's gotta go towards classroom instruction and for the kids. That's how we see it as the biggest benefit.
Sure, I think that was a good format to go from looking at one to the other and the changes and everything. It held my interest.
No one fell asleep, right?
I apologize for asking questions before I got to the question page.
That's okay.
I wouldn't remember them if I didn't
I didn't
ask
read
at the
it.
time, yeah.
Does anyone else have any other questions? If you ever want to sit down and go through, you know, more analytical composure of those numbers, I'm more than happy to do that with you. Like I said, you would be surprised at the amount of analytics that go behind these numbers. And the software program that we use works with, you know, leaders in not just the treasurer's field, but the Ohio Department of Taxation, Ohio Grants Management, and all of our organizations that feeds that data into there so that we can use that data to make our assumptions, not just based on our local situation, but on the state situation.
I was just saying that they didn't assume there was gonna be a pandemic and we were gonna hand out government funds and
No. And like I said, the main thing that people need to keep in perspective with this is that they're one-time funds. So, you know, if somebody came to you today and said, you know, hey Gary, I'm gonna give you $500,000 because I think you're a great guy, and you're gonna say, okay, I'm gonna go buy $1 million house with it. You're still gonna have to maintain the $1 million house, and I'm not giving you $500,000 a year. So, but that is my presentation if nobody has any additional questions.
That was good, thank you.
Cheryl, you're in the wrong spot, Gabby.
This
Here.
is not my fault.
Wes?
So we're gonna down to the Treasury Report with Cheryl again here.
The reports that are attached are just the redesigned system reports. You can see, the April board financial report, the changes in those reports. It's pretty typical for this time of the year, when we're getting closer to the end of the fiscal year, for those numbers to be closer to a higher percentage. I think that if you're looking at some of them, it's like have spent 78% over all of our appropriations, which you would consider normal this time of year. So there wasn't anything in these reports that I saw that was an alert or something to, you know, to bring to your attention. It's just kind of going business as usual, so.
Going down to 3.2 then?
3.2 discussion. You heard me talk about this during the 5-year forecast presentation. This is a resolution to pay off the $2.5 million lease purchase, Series 2016 bonds. If you remember, they were certificates of participation or COPS issue in July of 2022. So basically, there's just some legal stuff that we have to go through with notifying the bank within so many days, getting a payoff estimate from them, which actually I've already received. Because I did let them know up front, because I did not want them to find out at this meeting that this was going to be happening. Those things have been in place. Once the board decides, well, they want to move forward with the resolution, then there's some termination paperwork that needs to be sent and be recorded, because this was a lease purchase that was backed by portions of property that the school owns. So there'll have to be a recording of a release of those liens. So, any questions on that? And like I said, the balance is $1,050,000. There's about $15,000 in interest that'll be paid, and then the savings will be about $39,000 over the course of the remaining 3 years.
We'll move on down to the action items for the treasurer, 4.1.
I'll move on 4.1.
Chris, a second?
I'll second.
Gary? Does anybody have any discussion on the financials? Seeing none, we will have a roll call, please.
Mr. Wong?
Yes.
Mr. Rodenberger?
Yes.
Mr. Moats?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Eberlin?
Yeah.
Moving on down to 4.2, the resolution to pay off the bonds.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Thank you. Anybody have any discussion on that? Questions?
Mrs. Eberlin?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Moats?
Yes.
Mr. Wall?
Yes.
Mr. Rodenberg?
Yes.
And the final one, 4.3, the submission of the 5-year forecast.
I'll move it. 4-3.
Here, second.
No.
Great. Any discussion? I'd just like to say, Cheryl, great job on that. Thank you very much. And it's nice to see that we're going to be fine for a couple more years. Roll call.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Wall?
Yes.
Mr. Moats?
Yes.
Mr. Rodenberg?
Yes.
Mrs. Eberlin?
Yes.
Thank you, Cheryl. Moving on down to the superintendent's discussion items, 5.1.
5.1, some upcoming dates. We're at May 12, and I'm happy to report last day for students is May 27th. We do have our traditional early dismissal that day. We have sent that out to the buildings to remind them. They have communicated that to the parents. So I'm sure kids will be excited for that. And included in your packet is our teacher recognition breakfast that we will have here on May 28th. And then I put a flyer in there of the award recipients. And we have invited our retirees from last year to bring them back and honor them. I actually received a phone call from one of them. And he said, "I was hoping you forgot about me. I don't want to come back." And that's too bad. And then, of course, graduation at Fred J. Brown Stadium, 2 o'clock, what I would consider our traditional graduation, what we're all accustomed to. The only difference would be a family's going to get 10 tickets to attend graduation, which, if you think about it, a family bringing 10 people to a graduation, that's, I think, more than adequate. And here's going to be the thing. There are going to be some families that don't need 10. We're asking them to return those to us because somebody might need 12 or 15. Everybody will be able to bring everybody they need to bring to graduation. And we're going to be happy to do that. And Tim, what is the one thing that cannot happen on that day? Thank you. All right. But we do have our traditional backup plan to come into the gymnasium where you would be able to utilize 6 of those tickets. So, and that is common with how we ran it at the Palmer Drive building that used to sit out in front of us in the old school. So, last month, Gary, I think you brought up, or last meeting, not necessarily last month, about board meetings and moving all of them to Wednesday. I tried to put together something for you to see what a first and third Wednesday would look like, a second and fourth Wednesday would look like for the remainder of this year and into 22. I have no preference, and the reason I put that out for you folks, Cheryl, if we did decide to do that, would we have to make a motion to approve the new dates? Because we
Because of
approved them in
January, we
day.
do a motion to
Okay.
set the dates.
Okay,
So you could do a motion to amend them.
okay, and do that. So, again, if you look, I tried to put dates of interest along the right-hand side of that column so that you could see what that might fall into if you travel for out of town for family Thanksgivings and how close that butts up to it, et cetera. When is Labor Day, 4th of July, et cetera. Okay?
Yeah, I noticed that on the dates, under the potential new schedule, the dates that you show, where there may be a conflict, let's say in March, spring break, May, graduation, Memorial Day.
Those,
We traditionally only held one meeting
correct.
on that time.
And I would recommend that you stick to that schedule unless Cheryl needed a second meeting in May to do, that's what I would recommend
So
to
they
you.
it can be adjusted.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in July, we pick up an extra one.
You wouldn't have to because you normally have one in July. I just put them on there to show you how they would fall in the calendar.
Yeah.
And if you look at the bottom of the page, months with typically one meeting, March, May, July, Capitol Conference in November, and of course over the holidays at Christmas in December. Okay?
Now, would you need a motion to amend those this evening?
I would think that we should do that tonight if we're all in agreement tonight.
Will that come under the action item?
I would say we could put that under the action item. I do not have one on there. I wanted you to see it before we move, but we can make that addendum or that adjustment to the agenda now. Or, okay, when we get there. Third and final reading on the teacher evaluation policy. We can go through the rest of the discussion if you don't mind. Okay? I should say, is there more discussion on the board meeting dates?
I was just going to suggest I'd like to keep it at the second and the
So
That way we keep one consistent.
We have one, we already have on the schedule.
Yeah.
Because right now we have second Wednesday.
We go second Wednesday, fourth Monday. We would go second Wednesday, fourth Wednesday then. I like we make that, put that in there.
And then the months where there's only one meeting, keep those the same?
I would say yes.
Yes. Sorry.
No, that's good, because we really didn't get clarification on that. Okay, 5.3, final reading on standards-based teacher evaluation. Again, this is an adjustment to law. If you have any questions or comments at this point in time, I would entertain those. Hearing none. Item 5.4, student vaccine clinic that we held here on April 30th. We were able to, we had 38 students and their families elect to receive the vaccine here on school property with our partners from Rite Aid and the Defiance County Health Department. We actually had 2 staff members as well that early on chose not to for whatever reason. They made their mind up, they changed their mind and went ahead and got vaccinated that day as well. They will be back on the 21st to administer the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine. And I'm sure that you've seen in the news that this has been lowered to ages 12 to 15 now, basically 12 and older for the Pfizer vaccine. And for us to schedule to bring that in for the 12 and olders with 11 days of school remaining, we would run into some trouble, I think, in the second round of shots. So I don't anticipate us necessarily doing anything while we're in session. We will meet with the health department and superintendents, but I think you will see probably us trying to coordinate maybe a drive-through clinic or something along those lines. And the county does utilize our property when they do that, the health department. So when I get some details on that, I would be happy to share that with you as well. So. All right.
It's good to see that we have 38 students do it.
Yeah, and we had a number that had done it even prior to us being able to bring that on campus, so it was just something that's made it a little easier for some of these families.
Anything else on discussion?
No other discussion items?
Move on down to the action items, 6.1, the policy for the teacher evaluation.
I'll move on 6.1.
Chris, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Do anybody have any discussion on that? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call, please.
Mrs. Overland?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenberger?
Yes.
Mr. Wall?
Yes.
Mr. Mook?
Yes.
Thank you. This will be the time if we
Yeah.
want to.
I'd like to make a motion to amend our current meeting schedule from the second Wednesday and the fourth Monday of each month to the second and the fourth Wednesdays of each month. But, months where we hold just one meeting to remain the same, and those be held on the second Wednesday of those months, and those months on one, May, July, and December.
In November because of Capitol Conference.
And November. I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Yes, and November, excuse me.
Cheryl, you want to add that into the board docs after you get it
Yes.
handwritten down there?
Yeah.
I'll second.
Do we have any more discussion on that? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call for the change of date.
Mr. Wall?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenberger?
Yes.
Mr. Mook?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Overland?
Yes.
Awesome. Moving on down to the consent agenda.
All right, before we get into actually approving, I'd like to introduce or have Mrs. Steyer introduce Beth Lewis. Ladies, the floor is yours.
I have the privilege of introducing Beth Lewis. I've known Beth for the past 5 years, first as a supervisor, preschool supervisor in our Quad Eagle building, and then as a preschool and related service coordinator. Prior to that, she was a intervention specialist. She worked in Archbold, and she also worked in Stryker. She lives in Archbold with her husband, Jeremy, and they have 2 kids, Landon, who's 6, and Finn, who's 4. So please join me in welcome.
Welcome.
If you're
Could you move 6 feet away from her,
That's
Ms. Dyer, and have her remove her mask so we could see what. she
Yeah,
looks
there
like.
you
so you
go.
know what she looks like, yeah.
You got a picture of the two?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we are recommending tonight, Beth, for the position of Associate Director of Student Services, with the combined position, and Cheryl even noted within the, 5-year forecast about combining positions, and Beth has, come on board, willing to accept that responsibility, and, comes highly recommended and did an outstanding job in the interview process, so welcome, Beth. We're happy to have you.
Thank you, Beth. Now we'll vote on this.
Yeah.
Good.
And then officially.
Yeah.
Yes.
So moving on to consent agenda, do I have anything that would need to be removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, we will, ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Gary, you have a second?
I'll second.
Kathy? Anybody have any discussion or questions on any of this consent? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call, please.
Mrs. Overland?
Yes.
Mr. Moats?
Yes?
Mr. Wall?
Yes.
Mr. Rodenberg?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Moving on down to number 9, then, the old business. Anybody have any old business to bring to it?
I do, and I apologize for the lateness on this. I should have presented it at the last board meeting, but it's in regard to the Defiance School Foundation meeting that was held. Just a couple highlights. Every year, the School Foundation Board goes through a list of mini grants that are submitted by the teachers throughout the district, and I'm happy to state on behalf of the members of the foundation that we were able to provide $19,177.32 worth of mini grants for additional teacher needs in the classroom to help supplement the work that they do. And also mention that we saw an increase, I believe, over last year in our total amount of giving. Mr. Morton, help me there if he remembers the number.
It was over $25,000 increase, and they attributed that to a new platform of going to an online platform and reaching a wider audience of Defiance supporters.
And I just want to say personally, I want to thank the board for allowing me the opportunity to sit on that board with that group of individuals. They are very, very dedicated to the students and to the community, and for me, it's just a great pleasure to be a part of that. And, they did an outstanding job. That's all I have.
All right, any other old business?
I have a letter from Mrs. Wank at the elementary in regard to the mentoring program. As you know, this year, mentors were not allowed to go in the buildings, but some were staying in contact through either cards or phone calls, whatever. So she's basically saying that we're in hopes that next year we'll be able to get this program back up and running, hopefully with our volunteers that are there intact. So it's not unforgotten. It hasn't gone away. It just got put on hold because of COVID.
Any other old business? Move on down to new business.
Oh, I have just a comment. I don't know if I would consider it new business. Does that be?
I would say that you could classify it as new business.
First of all, as a board member, I have been now fully indoctrinated on the COVID-19 vaccine and all that pretty much goes along with it as far as being a parent of a student. I had one son test positive. Besides Michael, his twin brother was quarantined. And then I received a slurry of information from the superintendent, from the high school principal, and then the county department of health and the state department of health, because I happened to be on the cusp where they were transitioning from the local health departments to the state health departments. And at times it was very challenging for me as one person trying to get all the information straight together. But the one thing that I found that was probably more important and reassuring and comforting to me was I could call the school, I could speak to the secretary, or I could speak to the principal, or I could speak to the school nurse, or I could contact my local health department or state health department and
just say one thing, Gary. It's been every day, all day, since November 1st. And it's not, and we certainly don't want it to be part of our future routine. And I shared with the administrators in March, let's start thinking about school. Let's really start getting back to why we're here. And so we focus on the job of educating kids, and this creeps back into our lives, and we have to stop our focus and deal with those situations. But we've got good people that work for us and do an outstanding job, and I'll be happy to share your comments and sentiments with them. They handle it with the utmost professionalism regularly. So thank you for sharing that.
If I could extend upon that just a bit, from a bit of a different view, but the fact that he's calling the schools and he received excellent communication and direction and assistance and comfort, probably even at times. I just want to remind our public that our school personnel are there to do just that, and they do a great job of it. And I encourage anyone out there who has an issue that concerns them with their child or an event to pick up the phone and make the call to the appropriate staff person. And a reminder, the Board of Education is here to set policy. We are here to employ and oversee a treasurer and superintendent. And it's their job to oversee the operation of our district. And they've done a fabulous job of it. So I just, again, want to encourage our public to know we are all here at any time, including board members, I think, that are willing to take and field any call. But understand, if we refer you back to a building or an administrator, we're doing so because we have set process and policy. And we do so in recognition that there are times that situations can escalate up to this Board of Education, for which we would hear a particular case or evidence being presented from both sides. And we don't want to be influenced by having prior knowledge of those situations, so to speak. So I just want to encourage them. We've got a great staff here. They're working hard, and hopefully everybody understands they can make that call to our buildings, and they can call us as well. I'm good with that. I love hearing from people, but it is not, we are not the first stop, so to speak. Okay? Even though we love hearing from them, we're going to guide them back to the right spot.
Yeah, I appreciate that, so.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other new business? I see that we need an executive session for items 1, 4, and 5.
That's correct.
May I have a motion to go into executive session?
I'll move on.
Chris, do I have a second?
Second.
Michael? Any roll call then?
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Moats?
Yes.
Mrs. Oberlin?
Yes.
Mr. Rodenberger?
Yes.
Mr. Wong?
Yes.
And it's 6 p.m.
Beth, one of the things we didn't tell you when we were interviewing you, and now that you're officially employed,